A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one. But I've always felt that. I think reading is about vicarious experience.
What makes a story compelling? What is it about stories that gets us engaged and connected to their characters? These are questions that are generally very personal. The answer lies with every individual and what they respond to. However, when it comes to storytelling, there are certain elements that work generally, and these elements can be discussed and criticized objectively based on how well they're executed within the story. So in this video, I'd like to talk about the story elements that work best for me, and go through a few examples where they are executed extremely well or extremely poorly. These elements are plot consistency and character consistency. The reason I find these to be so important is because humans generally love to empathize with others.
For the same reason, I can pick up this pencil, tell you its name is Steve, and go like this. Oh. And part of you dies, just a little bit on the inside, because people can connect with anything.
There's nothing new about this concept. This has been taught to writers since the beginning of time, but that doesn't make it any less true. We as humans love to connect with other people. We love to see the people we connect with go through hardships and challenges and come out the other side better off for them. So how do you do this? How do you make people empathize with your characters? Well, it's the same reason the fish in Finding Nemo can talk or the cars in Cars can talk. People in general have a far easier time connecting to characters that display humanity. So how do you do that? How would someone write a character that feels like a real human? Well, the answer may be simple, but the execution is generally far more difficult. You have to make them act like humans. I know, it's a stupid answer, but it's really not as easy as it sounds. We often describe people by their traits. If I were to tell you about my friend and you asked me what they were like, I would most likely give you a list of their personality traits by saying something like, oh, they're really funny, or they're really smart, or they're batshit insane. It's not important what the trait is. What's important is the fact that I know these things about them because I've seen them display these traits again and again over a long period of time. If you meet someone for the first time and they act like an asshole, we all tend to jump to conclusions and maybe say, wow, that person's kind of an asshole, when maybe that person is typically extremely nice, but was just having a really rough day. What I'm trying to get at with these examples is that humans, for the most part, are extremely consistent with their personality traits. Most people rarely, if ever, permanently change their personality overnight. That's not to say people cannot change. In fact, everyone does. It generally just takes a long time and usually involves some kind of conflict, be it internal or external. I know it seems like I'm just giving some 2-bit lecture in a creative writing course at a community college, but this stuff is seriously important when it comes to storytelling. People may not always act logically, but for the most part, we all have some kind of internal logic we abide by. It's the same reason we always think we're right, even when everyone else might think we're wrong. Because through our internal logic system, we are always right. This fact, however, is the cornerstone to character writing that makes it so difficult. When writing characters that are not self-inserts, you have to get into a completely different mindset. You have to learn to essentially use someone else's internal logic system. You can't ever really ask yourself, what would I do in this situation? You have to ask, what would they do? This is why when a character does something I think is ridiculous, I don't say I would never do that, I say they would never act that way. The line here is very blurry and it's very easy to fall into that trap, but it is an extremely important distinction to make when criticizing your own story or others. Along with this, a character is hard to view as human if all of their character traits are positive. Everyone has their pluses and their minuses. All saints have their flaws, and even the most useless people in the world are good at some things. So even if a character is being 100% consistent, if they are consistently the best at everything, or consistently the worst at everything, it can make it difficult for people to see them as human, because nobody is perfect. It's very typical in stories to have characters that are average at most things, but excel in 1 or 2 things. The cast of characters in Community is a great example of this. If you haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I highly recommend you watch it, at least the first 4 seasons. The main character, Jeff, is a suave, charismatic leader who's great at talking his way out of situations. However, he's emotionally hardened from childhood trauma and has a hard time opening up to people and letting others in. Another character, Annie, is an extremely hard worker and does great in school, however she struggles when it comes to handling failure or rejection. I could go on, but hopefully you get the point. These characters will feel like real people to most of us because we know people like this. People who are really good at some things, but other things hold them back. This is why it can be so frustrating to see characters like Ray. I know, I bring up the sequel trilogy way too much, but it has pretty much every writing flaw in the book, and most people have seen it, so it's far too accessible to pass up. But we see Ray essentially consume the character traits of the characters around her, and specifically the positive ones. You would think Han Solo would know the most about the Millennium Falcon, but no, that's Ray. We're told Poe is the best pilot in the Resistance, but actually that's Ray. We are told Finn is the kind-hearted one who wants to strike out on his own, but learns to fight for the Resistance after realizing what the First Order are really like. But hey, Rey gets to do that too. People find this frustrating because no one is like this. I couldn't go and shadow a surgeon for a day and then perform heart operations better than they can the next. People can grow and they can change, but it takes time. Things have to happen in between for the change to be believable. This is why training montages and the like are so popular and even a cliche at this point. It's a shortcut to getting the character to the place the writer wants without skipping over it entirely. I'm not saying training montages are necessarily good, however they are better than nothing. Okay, so I've already talked a good amount about character consistency, so why is plot consistency so important when it comes to creating a compelling story? Well, it's for a lot of the same reason that character consistency is so important. It gives a way for the people consuming the story to connect with it. If you don't understand what I mean by this, I'll just ask, how many times have you lost interest in a book or movie because you had to stop yourself and ask what in the hell is going on? Typically, this is an issue with plot consistency. This is where I get extremely frustrated when people try to argue that logic does not exist in art, and since stories are an art form, therefore logic does not exist in stories. Aside from the fact that this is an argument using logic to defend the complete lack of logic in stories, this argument is nonsense. When writing a story, generally the author is trying to get the plot to move from A to Z. This is something most of us know. Every story starts somewhere, and everything that happens from there should build towards whatever happens at the end. And the beauty of fictional storytelling is that A and Z can be anything you want them to be, and I mean that completely literally. Whatever you can think of for the beginning and end to a story will always be fine. The trouble lies in connecting B through Y. Human brains are generally very logical. This is why it can be extremely satisfying to engage in a story that all fits together neatly. However, and please bear with me on this is not to say that every story has to be told in the exact order A to Z to be good. I know this may sound confusing, but a good example of this is The Shawshank Redemption. While the movie certainly starts at A and ends at Z, we are missing vital context for a lot of the movie. However, the film neatly packages all of it in the ending and tells us how everything happened and when it all happened. So what I'm getting at is for the story to be compelling like this, it is very helpful to make sure the audience is given and understands how each plot point in the movie flows together. Now, I know people are most likely tired of hearing about this movie, however I believe The Joker is one of the best examples of having a plot flow together wonderfully. This movie essentially kicks off with a start to an extremely bad day. Getting his sign stolen and him being beaten up is the only part of this movie I can say has no real cause. This is honestly just random violence. That's not to say that these things never happen or that this is a flaw of the movie, because these things do happen. It's just unfortunate that it happened to him. However, the story beautifully spirals downward into more and more suffering for Arthur until it breaks him completely. I've seen people call his suffering exaggerated, that nobody goes through this much trauma in such a short amount of time. This criticism of the movie has always been kind of frustrating to me, and honestly, it's not because I entirely disagree with it. Yes, it is a lot to accept that Arthur gets beat up 3 separate times, gets betrayed by a coworker, loses his job, finds out that he was adopted and that his mother let him get abused, gets ridiculed on live television, and gets into a relationship only to find out it was all in his head. All within the span of what feels like maybe a month? I get it, it feels like a lot. But the reason I feel like this criticism isn't totally valid is because the story has an extremely strong sense of cause and effect. There are explicit reasons for everything that happens to him. Other than the very beginning, like I said, we get solid logical progression throughout the rest of the film. We can pick a point in the movie and easily answer the question, how did we get here? Like say, how did he lose his job? Well, he lost his job because he brought a gun into a children's hospital. Well, why did he have a gun in the first place? Well, it's because his coworker offered it to him and he accepted. And why did he accept the gun? Well, it's because he wanted to protect himself after getting beat up in the beginning. This is what I'm trying to get at with the whole plot consistency thing. You can pick any point in the story and easily trace your way back to the beginning in a logical way, and this is where an important distinction happens. I am not talking about how I feel about this movie. What I'm talking about are factual things that happen in the movie. These are things that can be discussed and analyzed regardless of how you or I feel about this story. This isn't to say that I'm 100% correct and anybody who disagrees with me must be wrong, and that's the beauty of it. The objective parts of movies are the only parts where real disagreements can happen, because the way I feel about a movie is the way I feel about a movie. That's unique to me, and there's not a whole lot that can be done to change that. However, when we talk about the logic of the story, we're in a place where things will change based on the amount of information you have. That's why these things should be discussed, because we all have blind spots, and we all will notice some things that other people missed. But it doesn't end there. Because the traceability of the plot of Joker sort of implies the fact that every part of this script builds towards the final payoff, which is really important, because it can give you a sense like you know you're going somewhere. I at least never felt the need to stop and ask why we're here, because every scene was built off the last until it gets to the finale. Which, regardless of whether or not you liked it, at the very least we know why we're here. We understand how we got here and why this moment is important for Arthur. Now this leads rather nicely into my next example, because it's a movie that I really enjoyed, however it does the whole logic thing extremely poorly. Now I know for a fact this pick is going to make a lot of people mad, but please just hear me out, because I promise I wouldn't pick this if not for good reason. Alright, let's do this.
I do not mind the rain sometimes.
Yes, I know this movie is a ton of fun and refreshing from the usual slop that DC puts out. However, this is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Being fun and being refreshing are things that are unique to every viewer. Just because most people found it fun does not mean that everyone will. And this is also another important point. The way you feel about a movie has no effect on the arguments for the quality of the film. If I say the level of plot armor and insane luck that Harley has is extremely frustrating, or if I say that the Resistance woman joining the team of people that just murdered everyone she knew and loved is ridiculous and not something anyone would do, especially with no reaction, responding with, well, it didn't bother me, I still enjoyed it, or saying you're just nitpicking, it's still a good movie, is not an argument for the film. These issues still exist whether or not you notice them, and regardless of whether or not they bothered you. These issues are inherent to the film despite how you or I may feel about the film overall. And this is why I think this movie is such an apt example, because I really do enjoy this movie. I like it a lot, but there are tons of issues we can still discuss. And just a quick disclaimer, there will be spoilers throughout the rest of this video. I don't really know how to do these things, so there's gonna be spoilers. Okay. Right from the start, the conflict starts because Pete Davidson's character was able to get in contact and share classified information with a foreign government from prison. Like, okay, why? How? It almost makes me feel like this must have been supported by Waller as a diversion, because how else would he have made contact with a foreign enemy government from a prison made for supervillains? But then why would she put Rick on the diversion team? And this issue plagues the entire movie. Like right after this, we see Harley dodge an unfathomable amount of bullets, only to end up being captured, which is already kind of insane, because she almost certainly should have died by this point. But on top of that, she's captured so that she can be forced to marry the new dictator of this island, because he wants a wife that is a symbol of a rebellion to American oppression? Like, what? Did I read that correctly? So this insane clown woman somehow survived a hail of gunfire only to be captured and sent to marry a dictator of an entire country because she is somehow a symbol of rebellion to American oppression. How does any of this make sense? Why would the people of this remote island have any idea about the ideology of this insane woman from America? And would that really have that much of an impact on their view of their new dictator? And I could go on, but there's more examples of this, like the whole Rebel base scene. So why are our characters going in the first place? Well, they're going there to save Rick. Okay, so they have a live update of Rick's location, so can they get in contact with him? Well, no, apparently not. Okay, so is anyone gonna do any kind of recon or gather any intel? No, we just gotta go. And it all leads up to this scene. I'm really hoping this highlights my point well, because this scene is awesome. I won't lie, the kills are cool and creative, there's some great comedy, and we get probably the best line from the movie.
No one likes to show off.
Unless what they're showing off is dope as fuck.
Fuck. That's true.
However, as a part of this story, this whole sequence does not work at all. Like I said before, it's hard to justify why we're here with zero information in the first place. And I could understand if this was just the Suicide Squad's incompetence, because they're obviously not experienced with things like military tactics, but Amanda Waller absolutely shouldn't have let something like this happen. She's well established as a cold and calculating leader, but this scene makes her seem like an absolute moron. And to cap it off, Soria, I didn't remember her name either, she gets absolutely shafted in this scene. She has her entire army wiped out within minutes, and she barely even gives a reaction to this. And then she's just forced to go along with the team with no resistance at all. And when I say she's forced, I don't mean she was forced by anyone in the movie. I'm saying she's very clearly forced by the writer, because this is what James Gunn needed to happen. And this is what I'm trying to get across with all of this. The plot of this movie is the antithesis to what I praise so much about the plot of Joker. Where each point of the plot in Joker feels like a natural progression from what happened before, the Suicide Squad's plot feels like it's constantly being forced by the hand of the writer. This makes the movie exceptionally frustrating because it really does have so much going for it. But like I said before, being hilarious, being fun, being exciting does not make these problems go away. Those are things I would label as redeeming qualities, and what I mean by that is these are things that make it easier for me personally to look past the bad, but they're not things that everyone should or even could let affect their judgment of the movie. They're things that will work or not work for you on a personal level, and I'm telling you this stuff happens again and again and again and again. But I'm really not trying to make this a full-blown review, so I'm just gonna move on. Well, hopefully by now you understand what I mean and why I think plot consistency is so crucial. But we're not done here. I still want to talk about characters and what makes their consistency so important. Now there's almost a limitless supply of compelling characters, but I'm going to try to remain relevant and point to a film that I think creates multiple solid characters. Are you ready for this? Alright, the movie I picked for this is...
I do not mind the rain sometimes.
See, I told you it would get better if you stuck around, because as much as the plot of this movie drives me up a wall, I cannot deny that the characters in this movie are absolutely top-notch. Almost every main character has exactly what I talked about at the start of this video. Each member of the squad has their strengths and their weaknesses. They have their traits and their flaws, their morals and their beliefs. And one thing I think is really important is that each member certainly adds value to the team. I think we've all seen movies involving a team up where there's characters that you really have to question why they're even there. But I never found myself doing that for this movie. But why is that important? Well, I've actually talked about this a little bit in my Iron Giant video, but it has to do with efficiency of storytelling. Any time spent developing characters that have no purpose or payoff is time not spent with more important characters. It becomes fluff, it becomes useless screen time. For the sake of brevity, I'll try to keep this part short, but there's a few different things I want to talk about that happen with the characters in this movie. Now, I won't lie to you, when I watched this movie for the first time, I had a fairly negative reaction, which you would know if you joined my freaking Discord. But I really think I let the nearly nonsensical plot distract me from the absolutely wonderful things that were happening with the characters in this movie. And that's the amazing part of discussion. If I hadn't talked to anyone after this movie, I would have held on to the opinion of this movie being pretty below average. But after talking about what actually happens in the movie, I was able to go back with a different viewpoint and see the movie for what it is. There really is a lot of genuinely good character study embedded in the completely illogical plot of this film. So let's just dive in. This is an undoubtedly action and comedic heavy movie. Some of the action scenes are great, others are terrible. Some of the jokes really land and others not so much.
We find out you have personalized license plates. You don't.
What? No.
If you cough without covering your mouth.
Hardly. Although, that isn't an open invitation for you to cough without covering your mouth.
But where this movie unquestionably thrives are these scenes, where everything slows down and our characters have a chance to interact. This starts when King Shark is caught trying to eat Cleo. After Bloodsport is able to subdue him and everything calms down, we start to learn a lot about these characters. After being told King Shark was about to eat her, Cleo says,
I don't believe he would do that. He has very kind eyes.
This tells us that our first instinct is to trust people and see the good in them, even a shark. Right after that is when we learn about Bloodsport's phobia of rats, which isn't exactly important now, but we will get to it. Directly after this, Cleo asks King Shark if he would eat his friends, and he responds with,
I know friends.
And it's kind of a little heartbreaking. It's such a great creative choice to take this monstrous killing machine and give him the childlike personality. He's a giant dumb shark man who's only ever wanted to fit in. This coincides so well with what I was getting at in the introduction. In general, we can empathize with anything. It doesn't matter if it's the god of thunder or a pencil or a giant shark man. What matters is that we can relate to them. Most of us know what it's like to feel left out and alone or like we have no friends. We can sympathize with that and even feel it ourselves, and to me that's the most important thing about storytelling. Stories give us an outlet to truly feel our emotions without having to really go through them ourselves. I think most of us understand that, but it's hard to realize why we connect with characters in the first place. This is why I think it's so important to make characters feel like real people, because generally that is what people are going to connect with. I'm gonna move on though, because there are a couple more scenes I want to talk about. The next one being the bus ride into the city. This scene starts off with King Shark sitting in the back of the bus staring out the window, watching a couple kissing, and I am just blown away by the CGI in this movie. The amount of expressiveness we get out of him in this short moment is incredible, and again just heartbreaking. He doesn't say a word, but it's so easy to tell that this is something that he wants. Maybe he wants to be in a relationship, or maybe he just wants to be able to interact with people in a normal way. But because of what he is, I think it's safe to say he understands that he may never have that. It's just so brutal. Then we get another interaction between Cleo and Bloodsport. Cleo asks him why he hates rats, and Bloodsport gets defensive. He tells her she seems like a girl with daddy issues. This may seem like a tiny thing, but given the context, it's much deeper than just a random insult. We understand from the intro that Bloodsport's father was abusive and horrible. This is why he tells his daughter that she needs to stay away from him. He told her that all the good was wrung out of him by his father, and he doesn't want to do the same to her. It may seem strange, but it's his way of protecting her. However, when it comes to Cleo, all he really knows about her is that her dad goes by the same alias as her, and that she ended up in prison. So it's not unreasonable to assume that he believes she had a terrible father as well. So he projects his own daddy issues onto her. But she responds to him by saying,
I have no issues with how much I love my father.
And we can immediately see that Bloodsport feels guilty for what he said. After that, Cleo gives her backstory of how her father was a genius inventor but had a serious drug addiction, and that the rats had essentially taken care of them. She says she was arrested and charged with armed bank robbery because the state considered the rats a weapon, and that's why she ended up in prison. This tells us that she isn't a bad person, she was only doing what she had to survive. She was trying to make the best of the horrible situation she grew up in. After that, though, she asks Bloodsport again why he doesn't like rats, and this time his guard is down. He realizes now that she's being genuine. She's not just trying to get at him for having a rat phobia. She's an open, honest person who wants to know why he feels the way he does. And it's easy to see why a person like Bloodsport would not expect that from the people he usually interacts with. I wish I could express to you just how well done I think this scene is, because it really is just so densely packed. In just a few minutes we get so much history and material that informs exactly why these characters act the way they do. And this is what I love to see. Even with how much of a mess the plot of this movie is, as far as I can tell, it never comes at the expense of the characters. Very early on we are given all the information we need to determine their motivations, traits, and beliefs. And these things inform exactly how these characters act throughout the film. They all follow their own internal logic. And the most important part to me is that each of the characters' actions build towards their individual payoffs. And speaking of payoffs, I'm finally to the last thing I want to talk about with this movie.
Peacemaker. What a joke.
Again, when I first saw this, I was very annoyed. When I saw this turn to being a villain, I thought it came out of nowhere. It felt very abrupt. However, after some discussion and a rewatch, I realized that I was just being the biggest, dumbest, stupidest, hypocriticalest, dumb mother-father on the planet. Because the only reason this was a twist was because I wasn't paying close enough attention. It was my failure, not a failure of the writing. Peacemaker's entire motivation is summed up with the line,
I cherish peace with all my heart. I don't care how many men, women, and children I need to kill to get it.
He has the same kind of motivation that many great villains have. World peace is something I'm sure most people would consider a noble goal. However, where we take issue with it is the methodology used to attain it. He wants peace at any cost, even if it comes at the cost of someone he considers a hero. And this is where I have to praise John Cena for his acting, because he makes it very clear that Peacemaker does not want to kill Rick, but he feels like he has to. And this is another point where I feel like I was just being a hypocrite on my initial watch. Because at first I felt that just saying the leaked data will cause an international incident was an extremely thin excuse to have this scene. However, like I said at the beginning, it doesn't matter whether or not I believe this data leak would cause an international incident. The only thing that matters is that Peacemaker believes it. And from everything we've been shown, through the acting, through the dialogue, the story does an extremely good job of convincing me that he does believe it. That's the important bit. The character shines because he's acting in a way we can all believe he would be acting, not because it's in a way we would act. And this is what makes this movie so difficult for me to give a solid rating, because legitimately the plot is at best a 3, so little of it makes any sense whatsoever. But none of it comes at the cost of the character writing, which is genuinely like an 8 or 9. I'm sorry that this turned into a lot more of a review of the Suicide Squad than I wanted it to, but this movie really does so many characters so well that it gave me a lot to talk about. And I know a lot of you think I'm just a cynical asshole about films, but I generally do enjoy praising media more than criticizing it. It's not my fault everything Disney has made recently has been terrible. Speaking of things being terrible, let's take some time to talk about a show that wrote its characters in what might be the most horrible and heartbreaking way.
To be honest, I never really cared much for them. Innocent or otherwise.
Oh man, I've been waiting for any excuse I could find to talk about this show, and here we are. And obviously I know this topic has been done to death, but I really don't know if I could find a more egregious example of character writing being done in a way that perfectly counters everything I've been talking about in this video. We were given an array of beautifully well-defined, complex characters, where the least awful of the offenders like Tyrion and the Hound were ground down into entirely flat and uninteresting characters, and the most awful, such as Jaime, Daenerys, and Jon, were outright and plainly assassinated. And as much as I hate to say it, the people who defend these choices by saying something like Daenerys was always an evil murderer, we just didn't see it, I feel like they've completely forgotten what it was that made these characters so special in the first place. The actions these characters took were always more than just surface level. Whether good or bad, smart or dumb, each character had their own reasoning for why they did what they did. And it was all informed by what we knew about them. It was the why, not the what, that made these characters so good. And it's the same reason it's so frustrating to see these same characters acting in ways we know they never would. Watching Jaime go on a 4-season-long redemption arc, and only when we finally start to feel like it's been completed, it gets flipped on its head in a single episode. And this right here is the purpose for the title of this video. It is, of course, acceptable and even expected for characters to change throughout a story, but like I said at the beginning, it takes time and it takes some sort of pressure to change, and the writers of Game of Thrones understand this. That's why after Jaime's bathtub conversation with Brienne, he didn't immediately switch sides. It still took 4 seasons of him and his worldview being challenged for him to change. And this is the most crucial part. A character arc where Jaime goes through a full redemption only to slip back into his old ways is a story he could have had, and it could have been extremely unique and interesting, but we only got half of that journey, and we have to see that journey in order to believe it. Now I think I'm going to have to cut myself off here. As much as I could go on and on about the characters of Game of Thrones, that's not the point of this video. I really just wanted an excuse to talk about these writing concepts so that maybe, if there are any potential writers in my audience, they can take something away here. But at the end of the day, while I do think it is important to understand these concepts in order to use them in your own work, I will not lie, this stuff is extremely difficult to pull off. So if you really want to be a writer and you're passionate about doing it for a living, the best advice I can think to give you is to just do it. Practice this stuff constantly and never stop writing. As cheesy as it may sound, your greatest asset as a writer is the fact that you are you and no one else is. Even if you feel like a fraud or like everything interesting has already been done, you will never be able to write exactly like someone else, and no one will ever be able to write exactly like you do. So keep it up. Keep working, keep improving, and keep putting yourself out there. And seriously, thank you all for watching. I love you all so much. Join my Discord so we can chat. And let's just keep trying to make media better and keep trying to make better media. Oh god, that was terrible.